In 1987, this little curmudgeon turned 12 years old. And just as puberty and raging hormones start to turn his antenna away from Transformers and more toward girls, his interest in rock and roll starts to peak as well. It wasn't surprising that I would reacquaint myself with my innate interest in music. As a little boy, I grew up to love and listen to both of my older brother's vinyl record collections: Led Zeppelin, Queen, Rush, AC/DC, Pink Floyd, the Beatles, the Eagles, Elton John, even Boston. More on them in the next episode. All were fundamental touchstones of my formative years as an incubating music geek. However, in 1987, as a preteen entering junior high, it was the modern rock of the time that I gravitated to for, if no other reason, than it was popular, and I was already conditioned to be into guitar music. In Miami, Florida, in 1987, the hip/modern music spectrum for middle school or junior high school kids had a range of the following 5 groups. First, any and all of the commercial pop of the time: Madonna, Prince, Michael Jackson, George Michael, and whatever teen pop and or boy band was popular. I would grow into loving some of this music later on, but at the time it was a little too plain and square for my growing tastes. Also, for some reason, this was the soundtrack for the budding macho jocks and developing stuck-up snobby girls who, respectively, bullied and humiliated me. Fuck that. The popular hip-hop of the day, a genre which would take me another 7 or 8 years to fully understand and appreciate, was another one of these groups, and I would eventually love that, but at the time I wasn't into it. The third group was what at the time was called quote-unquote Miami bass music. Basically, this was the American southern region's, not just Miami's, version of Chicago's house music and Detroit's techno that was heating up dance clubs across the country. You probably know it if you've heard it. You know, boom, psh, boom, boom, psh, boom, psh, boom, boom, psh, boom, psh, boom, boom, psh. That kind of stuff. The people who listened to this music weren't far away from the pop crowd, and they also bullied and picked on me. Fuck that. The fourth group was a very small minority of pimply-faced, denim-wearing kids who worshipped at the thrash metal altar of Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, and Anthrax, all of whom were pretty underground at the time. Those kids were actually nice to me, but this kind of metal was a little too extreme for me at the time. Then the fifth group, the more accessible kind of modern rock, i.e. glam metal or hair metal, the kind of which was all over commercial rock radio and MTV at the time. Motley Crue, Van Halen, Poison, Twisted Sister, Bon Jovi, and more Bon Jovi. Notice I also said Van Halen. Yes, I know at this time they had Sammy Hagar and they were involved in another musical direction, but their fan base and fan base's musical preferences remained the same. So it was into this latter category that I consciously delved, even though I instinctually knew this kind of rock was a little off. Even at my young age, I had the sense to know that this was by some measure inferior to the classic sounds I knew as a younger boy. But the call of tribalism that pre-adolescent peer pressure induces was strong, and off I went to borrow casual friends' cassette copies of Motley Crue, Poison, Iron Maiden, yikes, and, yes, Bon Jovi. I tried, man, I really tried. But then, one weekend in the evening in late '87, something portentous happened. I was up late watching one of my favorite wrestling shows when a commercial for a 1-800 hotline phone number came on. Back in the old days, kids, companies would air quote-unquote hotline commercials that would entice people to call a certain phone number and pay money. The amount will be deducted from your phone bill, and you would pay that money to get either some hot gossip celebrity information, enter a contest by dialing numbers corresponding to certain answers, or dial numbers for adult/sex talk. This commercial was for a music trivia contest. If you answer correctly, you would win money. Hey! They had an example in this commercial where they played a short snippet of the chorus to Bon Jovi's Living on a Prayer. Oh, living on a prayer. And the speaker would say, dial 1 for Bon Jovi or 2 for U2. Even if I knew the answer, no way would I incur my strict mother's wrath by ringing up our phone charges. But the name of the alternative to Bon Jovi stuck with me. U2. What a weird name for a band. Later on, in early 1988, the Catholic school I went to would occasionally have a quote-unquote casual day, in which instead of our regular school uniforms, we would be allowed to wear regular clothes, as long as we weren't wearing shorts. There was this one kid, the only kid in the entire school, who, like the metalhead kids in the school, came in wearing blue jeans and a denim jacket that was decked out in patches over the sleeves and the back. But instead of metal band patches, Metallica, Megadeth, etc., it was all 100% U2 patches. A gigantic U2 patch on the back, U2 patches on the arm sleeves, and even U2 lapel pins, some of which were pictures of the individual band members. This weirdly named band had at least one superfan in my school. I won't say his name, but socially he was part of one of the cliques that tormented and bullied me. Every now and then, though, he would talk to me like a normal human being. My expressed interest in U2 that he was showcasing made him want to talk to me more. He wasn't the most articulate guy when it came to describing music. All he could do was say how awesome they were. Where are they from? Ireland. What do they sound like? Oh man, they rock. Are they thrash metal? No. Are they like Bon Jovi, meaning glam or hair metal? No. Are they punk rock? No. Are they an older classic rock band? No, they've only been around for a few years. Actually, a little less than a decade at this point, but he didn't know. It was around this time that I started actively and continuously listening to modern rock radio and coincidentally, or not coincidentally, becoming a little disenchanted with the style of rock that I had aligned myself with. But lo and behold, the more I listened, interspersed between sets of like 10 songs by shitty metal bands, a U2 song would pop up. And the kid was right. They did sound unlike anything that was on the radio at the time. Strikingly and startlingly so. They didn't have the formulaic macho cock rock posturing of the other seemingly popular bands at the time. There was an earnestness and an authenticity to them that imbued them with a genuine soulfulness. Although I couldn't articulate those exact words at the time, I could certainly feel it. They could rock pretty hard, but they were more accessible and not nearly as monotonous as the underground metal bands whose tapes were being bandied about during school lunchtime. I could detect a tasteful sensibility in them that was more in line with the classic rock records I grew up with, but they sounded absolutely nothing like Zeppelin or Beatles or any of their ilk. Every single one of their songs sounded different from each other, and it seemed like each song told a different story, delivered a different message, conveyed a different emotion. And that guitar sound by this dude called The Edge, what the hell was that? It was loud and all-encompassing, but it was chiming and crystalline and seemed to have a personality all its own. And this singer with the odd name of Bono, whose voice soared with the righteous power of a guy who said what he meant and meant what he said. Their lyrics also felt and sounded like they were about something, which was in stark contrast to the pop metal bullshit that I felt I was being force-fed at the time. I cannot stress this enough. I was 12 years old, going on 13. I had no idea what indie or alternative rock was. My mom refused to pay for cable TV at the time. I had no notion of college radio, even though I could have easily found the University of Miami's WVUM on the radio dial had I been directed. And I wouldn't discover punk rock until several years later, after my Nirvana grunge epiphany, and I wouldn't discover Bob Dylan until college. So for a kid like me, there were no reference points for a band like U2. Not only did they sound revolutionary and fascinating, they sounded right. For a kid like me, and for a kid like your other curmudgeon, Chris, who was my age at the time, they were freaking superheroes by comparison to what else was going on. It was soon after that meeting with the U2 fanboy that my listening loyalties shifted to the devouring of classic rock radio and all the splendor of 1960s and 70s rock. I would still go back to modern rock radio, though, to keep up with what was new. But really, it was to catch whatever U2 I could, along with another band I would soon discover called REM. It was these two bands whose airplay on modern rock radio would keep me interested in the format for the next few years, in spite of the endless slog of garbage glam metal, past their prime acts like Ozzy Osbourne, Alice Cooper, or Van Halen trying to be glam metal, and the endless saturation of Guns N' Roses. As far as U2 were concerned, this was the beginning of a fandom that would continue in strong form, with both Chris and I being constant apologists for some of the band's biggest indulgences and egomaniacal tendencies for more than a decade before they became creatively bankrupt, corporatized to a shameful extent, and Bono's overall megalomania just getting too overbearing. Nevertheless, the past 20 years should not erase the long streak of timelessly brilliant songs, innovative sounds, and massively influential albums, even if you don't like the bands they've influenced, that they unleashed in the 1980s and 90s. Yes, believe it or not, there was a 10 to 15 year span when U2 were not only the biggest, most popular band in the world, they were arguably the best. That is why this podcast is bringing you this special edition and this special episode that asks the question, albeit in a very pithy manner, remember when U2 didn't suck? If you were there, you should remember. If you're younger and you weren't, this is why you should know. Welcome to the Curmudgeon Rock Report.
Now, as we record this episode, here is what U2 is up to. They've just begun a residency at a new venue in Las Vegas called The Sphere, which is a $2 billion, 160 square foot monstrosity that Wired.com describes as virtual reality-like immersiveness via a, quote, 160,000 square foot 16K by 16K LED display. From that same Wired.com piece comes this quote from The Edge, quote, "The real breakthrough is in offering this immersive experience at scale with an audience that you're a part of. Rock and roll is a gathering of the tribes. There's a sociological aspect to it. The experience itself is completely different when you're there in the room with all these other fans. That's the thing that makes this so powerful." Ew. It's all a grossly grand corporate spectacle and technology whoring session starring a band that long ago became a gross self-parody of grand corporate spectacle and technology whoring. This people is the vortex in which U2 now resides. And it's a shame, really, isn't it, Arturo?
Well, I mean, they are now in the nostalgia act phase. They're like the
Yes.
Rolling Stones. That's what they
Yes.
are now. I'm sure the set list. Yeah, I know. They're playing all of Achtung Baby in its entirety, but aside from that, the set list is pretty much the hits. You
Yeah.
know,
I mean, and
so
that's the thing. And who knows? I mean, it basically what they've become is they've become like, oh, we're so cool fodder for people who actually want to shell the four figures for the tickets to get into the venue.
yeah,
You know what I mean? They're an advertisement. And
yeah,
so it just makes me cringe. I mean, even if they are, the little bit I've heard from YouTube, they sound great, but they're still,
sure. I'm sure it
you
sounds
know,
great.
yeah.
Yeah,
But they've sold their souls to the devil. Mephisto is no longer. Now it's just the devil,
yeah.
and that's
The Mephisto character from Zoo TV is no longer an ironic commentary.
no, it is not, and that is too bad. But remember, this episode is about us recalling a time when they did not suck. And so we
Yes.
promise folks this will be a joyous romp through the good meat of U2, one of my favorite bands of all time. And
Basically their 1980s and 90s output.
yes, speaking of the good old days, where the good old days are the good new days, don't you?
And the good old days remain good.
Yes, the good old days are still good, and they have a fresh new car smell. Yes, we're talking about the parallel universe, folks. We have crossed over from that rip in the space-time continuum, and we're in the fields where rock is fertile and grows tall, where it still predominates, it's still on the billboard, it's still in the arenas. Taylor Swift, Move Over, Wilco are on the cover of Rolling Stone, although, as we'll get into, maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not, but they are. On this side of the parallel universe, they are the Eagles, and we also have our own equivalent of a newfangled Emmylou Harris on this side that we
Sure.
must turn you folks onto, and that's what Arturo is doing this week. A brand new album by a surprisingly great country singer. Take it away, Art.
Yes. Yeah, this is Margo Cilker with a C, not an S, and her second album called Valley of Heart's Delight. And it is my delight to finally talk about an album from this year that isn't mediocre, disappointing, or a 3-star meh.
Yeah.
Margo Cilker is originally from Santa Clara, California, but currently resides in rural Washington state and is married to a man who is an actual certified cowboy. And the couple live on a ranch with their dog and several horses. If that isn't genuinely country enough, then there's Cilker's music itself. I've read in some areas where she's been classified as Americana or alt country or even indie folk. That's a load of bullshit.
Yeah.
This is pure, real country, the way it's supposed to sound, i.e., not corporate radio, red state pop country. These are brilliantly written songs that run the gamut and range of country styles, from plaintive mid-tempo grooves to pedal to the metal barroom stompers, to aching tear-in-your-beer ballads, to rollicking sing-alongs, to even epic, expansive, highly lyrical anthems, the kind of which the late Robbie Robertson and the band were known for. It's all flawlessly executed by her crack band and beautifully sung by Cilker herself, with the heartfelt conviction of someone who has lived inside these songs. Key tracks: the powerful horn-driven Keep It On a Burner, the wonderful, hilarious cross-country travelogue I Remember Carolina, and the wistful, heartstring-pulling All Tied Together. This is a stone-cold 4 out of 5-star album and is now and will probably remain in my top 5 albums of this year. Chris?
Yeah, on first listen, I think it's headed there for myself as well. Yeah, I'm also a big fan of I Remember Carolina. That is, as travelogue songs go, it might not be in the John Prine category, but it's close.
Yeah.
And yeah, she's definitely got that kind of California country rock vibe to
Right.
her.
Right.
but pure country. And you caught me at a good time with this because I have been in a Zach Bryan phase. We cannot talk about Zach Bryan in the parallel universe, considering that this year he's had a #1 album and a #1 single, a #1 pop single on the Hot
Right.
100. But the guy is a brilliant songwriter, and his self-titled record that he released in August is my #1 album for the year so far. I have a feeling though that this album's going to slide in pretty high too from Margo Cilker, because like you said, she's a bona fide country singer. This is lyrically what country is supposed to be, which combines the tender with the tough and the goofy.
Yeah.
That country's supposed to have kind of a wink wink goofy side to it, and she's got that, but she's got some of the stuff about her family and her relationship with her mother is really, really poignant. And yeah, she definitely has the goods. And like you said, she's married to an actual cowboy up there on a ranch in the Pacific Northwest. So you can't beat the authenticity. So I look forward to listening to this album more and really discovering it. I have a feeling it's going to keep growing and growing and growing on me. And so that brings us to a transition. What I don't think is going to grow on me?
The new Wilco album.
The new Wilco record. We made a reference to them that, yes, some people listening to this podcast, and if you're in our core audience, you might be wondering why we're talking about Wilco in a parallel universe. Arturo alluded to this last year when we covered their last record, because in a world that was fair and just, Wilco would be as big as the Eagles. They would be huge. They wouldn't just be catnip for nerds like us. They would see some of their stuff from like Being There and Summer Teeth and YHF. YHF is one of those hipster classics at this point, but it would.
By the way, YHF is Yankee Hotel Foxtrot for those who don't know.
Yes, Yankee. Yeah, I'm talking inside baseball. Thank you, fact checking, cuz. But it just it's kind of an intelligentsia hipster classic, but it would be kind of like Frampton Comes Alive in a world that was just, because it is that good. Right. And so we cover Parallel Universe because we're kind of, it's a justice call. It's not so much a profile call, it's a justice call. Now, that said, let's get into this piece of crap called Cousin. So we talked them up as legends, and now we're going to kind of cut them down. What a frustrating listen. Now, I mean, Wilco is a remarkable band one way or another. At their very best, they are remarkably potent and transcendent. And at their very worst, they are remarkably confounding and remarkably muddled. Unfortunately, they have spent most of the past 20 years towing closer to the latter line. And we find them once again in that remarkably confounding territory on their latest album, Cousin, which was just released in late September. Here's the first thing I'll say. The album sounds great. The energy is there. The noise art that they've dabbled in since Nels Cline has been in the band, a guitarist, is there. The moodiness of the band's best stuff is there, the inherent moodiness. But here's what isn't there: decent songs.
Yeah.
Now, there is one song that I've decided I love and that I will talk up. And I would strongly urge folks to go find it on the streaming services and YouTube. It's a oddly psychedelic, slow-burning, countryish ballad called Pittsburgh, in which band leader Jeff Tweedy sadly croons about outliving his dream as he travels from the airport in the rain. Otherwise, the album is a meandering, steaming pile of shit that it is. It swings from cutesy, over-arranged slop to wannabe chewing gum commercial jingles and back again. It probably needs to be heard to actually be believed. And ultimately, Cousin becomes something of a depressing listen because of that. Why? Ultimately, because at time it evokes the two best records that Wilco has released over the past 20 years, namely 2004's A Ghost Is Born and 2011's The Whole Love, on which the noise had a purpose and helped shape and craft sets of moving rock songs. The latter of those, by the way, The Whole Love is one I think is one of the best 5 records of the 2010s. I would put it up there that strongly. So here, Tweedy and company are definitely not phoning it in. They are engaged and they are trying. And it certainly is more interesting than their past several albums. But the goods just aren't there, which just really sucks, doesn't it, Arturo?
I disagree. I think they are phoning it in. Songwriting wise, Tweedy. Listen, this is the thing with Jeff Tweedy. Yeah, he's great. He's a great songwriter. You know, he's kind of at this point almost a under the radar rock legend. But he does have his phases where he phones it in, and he's just not trying his best with his songwriting, and he gets very complacent. Sky Blue Sky from 2007, Wilco, the album from 2009. That was their slump that they were in before The Whole Love in 2011 brought them out of it. With this album, Kate LeBon produced it. I'm not a fan of her music at all, but she did do a good job in producing this record.
Oh, yeah.
It's well produced. There's some really good, subtle musicianship. There's some really some good flares with the arrangements. But like you said, the goods. And when I think of the goods, I think of the songwriting.
Yes.
Good, arresting songs with melodies and hooks and good lyrics. The lyrics in this album are really bad. Tweedy's really just not trying. He's phoning it in a lot. The songs are very plodding. They're meandering. They don't really go anywhere. They're monotonous. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to give a quote. I still read allmusic.com.
Yeah, I do too.
I do like Stephen Thomas Erlewine. It's his website, and he's a really good writer. But an anonymous, not anonymous, but a fan, a regular person, gave a user review of this album, and he kind of agrees. He or she, I'm not sure, but I'm going to assume it's a he. GB Ferson Fearson is the person's name, and this is what he wrote, and I think he really nails it. One of the most unfortunate side effects of the streaming service age of music is the sense that there are simply too many songs, too much music touching upon the same themes and subjects over and over until every possible expression becomes a trope or a motif. Visual art has escaped this, but musical art feels badly weighed down and cheapened by its over-accessibility and overabundance. This is not Wilco's fault, of course, but to me, Cousin feels particularly unnecessary. The entire record feels like it could simply not exist, and the world would go on spinning without adjustment, as would Wilco's fame, popularity, and status. That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's profound. He's right about that there is something to be said for oversaturation. And it's kind of hard to outdo yourself when there's, basically when the world is a fire hose.
This is the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and this is your podcast made by rock geek iconoclastic outsiders for rock geek iconoclastic outsiders. For those of you who lament that rock music has gone the way of jazz and slipped into niche genre status, we are here to keep that flame alive by providing insight, analysis, recommendations, and honest takes, not hot takes. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some rock history you never knew before.
Remember when U2 did not suck? We do, and we're going to remind everybody why this band is still so revered and why they're the first band that people think of when they want to open up their new fancy toy in Vegas. Arturo, let's start briefly from the beginning before we launch into their golden period, which basically lasts 10 years. So remind everybody how they started and then set us up.
Yeah, U2 started out as a teenage high school band in Dublin, Ireland in 1976. And they were literally the first band either of the four members was in when they decided to make a life out of music. From 1976 to 77, they were called Feedback. From 1977 to 78, they were The Hype, before finally settling on U2, combining the stealth aspects of the infamous spy plane from the early 1960s and a silly play on words. U2, get it? It took a couple of years of endless practice, endless gigging, and endless record listening for them to formulate the sound that would be featured on their first album, Boy, which eventually came out in the fall of 1980 after an A&R representative from UK-based Island Records signed them in the spring of that year, following up on the major hype the band were getting in the Irish music press and the glowing reviews their live shows in London had gotten from the previous year. If one had to really home in on what U2's early sound was, you can break it down to three core influences: Joy Division, Television, and Patti Smith.
Yeah.
They may have loved punk bands like the Ramones and the Clash and even played some of their songs in their early sets, but new wave and post-punk were really the stuff of which U2 was originally made. From Joy Division, you get Adam Clayton's slinky, loose bass lines and Larry Mullen Jr.'s snappy drum patterns. Bernard Sumner, Joy Division's guitarist, had some pretty innovative, somber tones to his guitar lines, and they certainly informed much of the Edge's early guitar playing. However, it was the swirling colors of Television's guitars, particularly those of the late, great Tom Verlaine, that the Edge really assimilated and reproduced into his own, especially with the help of his echo pedal, otherwise known as a delay effects pedal, which is widely known now and widely used, but was pretty new back then, and helped make the Edge's guitar sound one of the most distinctive features of U2's early sound. The other, of course, was Bono's vocals, which at least early on owed a great debt to Patti Smith. It wasn't just his searing earnestness and sensitivity that convinced listeners and connected with them. It was his shamanistic, charismatic intensity as a live performer that really made him stand out in a post-punk scene that was all about cool detachment and false modesty. The album, Boy, really sounds like what it is. A bunch of 19 to 20-year-old young men trying to find their musical voice and place in the world, both musically and lyrically. Their sound is there if the songwriting totally isn't yet, except, of course, for the brilliant single I Will Follow, which was a major hit in their native Ireland, a moderate hit in the UK and Europe, and received considerable airplay on American college radio. The Edge's guitar is the knife edge that really cuts through the track, both as a timeless riff and an irresistibly catchy hook. Contrary to what a lot of people think, the lyrics to I Will Follow are not Christian lyrics about following Jesus. According to Bono, it's him singing from the point of view of the ghost of his deceased mother, who swears to follow her son's path wherever he goes. It's kind of creepy if you think about it.
Yeah, seriously.
They weren't big yet, but they were making a name for themselves in an underground rock cultish kind of sense. And cultish is the appropriate word for what was going on behind the scenes that nearly led to their breakup in 1981. Yeah. For a few years leading up to this point, the three Christian members of U2, Bono, The Edge, and Larry Mullen, found themselves associated with an extremist Christian cult called Shalom. What started as a prayer meeting, scripture reading group for a collective of high school teenagers got absorbed by this cult. And soon enough, the group had a hierarchy and rules, and they got stricter and more intrusive and oppressive as time went by. Before judging these guys too harshly, keep in mind, they were barely in their 20s when this was going on. How many bad decisions did you make when you, the listener, when you were a teenager leading up to the age of 21? You two were no exception. Bono, The Edge, and Mullen found themselves forced into choosing between living the unrighteous life of being in a rock band and the supposedly righteous life of, quote unquote, doing God's work. Thankfully, manager Paul McGuinness and the band's atheist bassist, Adam Clayton, convinced the other three that they had commitments to their record label and their touring schedule. Therefore, their small but significant road crew. The cult Christian group was ditched. U2 would continue as a band, but the aforementioned conflict would have a considerable effect on their follow-up album, October. released in the fall of 1981. The songs sound unfinished, uneven, and conflicted. And the overall lyrical theme of looking to God for help, even if it is questioning and slightly critical rather than being preachy and worshipful, is too ponderous and overbearing. However, the single Gloria is, well, a glorious stab at bombastic anthem rock, with the Edge's ever-intriguing guitar lines leading the way for a song that's deceptively complex, with Mullen's shifting drum patterns throughout and funky break in the middle. It was another good-sized hit in the UK and Europe and received considerable airplay on the then nascent MTV in America. More importantly, though, it was as an awesome and powerful live band that U2 were making their reputation with and fostering their growing cult following from. Now, if only they could make an album to match their live shows.
Yeah.
Chris, any thoughts on early U2?
Yeah, I think it's pretty early on that, there's, and we'll talk about this. There's a few themes that really just kind of encapsulate and kind of define U2's work. And one of them shows up from the very beginning, which is hope. One of the reasons I think that Bono annoys people so much is he may be the most hopeful rock star, and Edge may be the most hopeful guitar player in all of rock. Hope to the point of annoyance, and you do get that. The Boy, which is a well-named record, it does have that kind of it's idealistic bombast as opposed to showy bombast, which they kind of got into by the end of the 80s. And a good call on Verlaine and that connection, because of the effects pedals and the delayed effects. It's kind of, you wouldn't put it 1-to-1 with the Verlaine's tones, but the playing style and the inherent drama are there. And it is interesting that whole thing about that, how the band almost got destroyed by a cult, which is ironic because they kind of became a cult in and of themselves, kind of worshipful of themselves. But the early catalog is more interesting in the sense of it's a record of what they were before they became what they became. And we'll talk about this next, the leap that they make from this early period where they're figuring out who they are in their early 20s to then becoming U2. They were a band called U2, but they weren't yet U2. Yeah. And, they were sort of still kind of scratching and clawing for identity. The only thing you could say is hope with an echoey guitar up to this point. And so then we get into, we segue into 1983 and something remarkable happens, doesn't it?
Yes. The breakthrough is what I call this. By the time of the recording of their third album, U2 found themselves under pressure. October didn't really build on the success of Boy sales-wise, and it was critically panned. In fact, word started to spread that if the next record wasn't a hit, Island Records would drop the band from the label. Bono, The Edge, and Larry Mullen had left the Shalom cult behind and resolved whatever spiritual conflicts they may have had, strengthening the band's resolve and helping them focus on the fact that they needed to deliver the goods with album number 3. Instead of inward introspection, Bono, not just the singer, but the band's lyricist and musical direction driving force, decided to look outward and found lyrical inspiration from both the sectarian conflict between Ireland and Northern Ireland, as well as the battles being waged in Eastern Europe at the time, during the old Soviet bloc. Yeah. The band responded by making the toughest, roughest sounding music they had ever made at that point. They beefed up their anthemic, arena-friendly take on angular post-punk with the muscular, riff-heavy, heavily political album War. The album cover pretty much says it all. The innocent young boy on the cover of Boy has now aged into an angry, battle-scarred preteen. With Bono's most direct and emotional lyrics, yet. The Edge's most explosive guitar riffs and the Clayton Mullen rhythm section's most bombastic grooves. The album put U2 on the mainstream rock map, graduating them to theaters and large concert halls across the world. Not only did they sound like an actual punk band for the first time ever, they started to dress the part with all black attire and boots, building on the confrontational aesthetic they coined as militant pacifism. They broke American rock radio with the Marshall-timed anti-war rocker Sunday Bloody Sunday, hammering in the point that one of Ireland's darkest days, the Bloody Sunday massacre of peaceful protesters by British troops in Northern Ireland, took place on a Sunday, a holy day for both Protestants and Catholics. New Year's Day was another huge radio hit with its sublime bass line and yearning for romantic connection in an apocalyptic time. The latter song went top 10 in the UK. The album War went to number 1 in the UK and top 10 in the US and throughout Europe. But just as importantly, the band announced themselves as socially conscious rock's heirs to The Clash. And Bono established himself as one of rock's preeminent socio-political commentators. Chris?
Yeah, this album is just remarkable, and especially compared to where they were. And basically, what I think the real breakthrough is getting away. This album's not as beholden to the sounds of the English clubs. It's not as beholden to the new wave template that they were holding. They were kind of finding their own song and their own beat. Just the interplay, like that rhythm section is so muscular, as you said, and then the Edge is also just kind of finding new notes. But I think that this is really Bono's record. I think that this is Bono. That not only is he steeped in hope, that there's a lot of songs, there's denunciation of wars all over Europe and denunciation of treatment of refugees and just sort of the chaos around everybody. But he has a real sense of hope, and not only hope, but grace. And that's another thing that really kind of defines this meaty part of the U2 catalog is there's a remarkable grace of seeing the humanity even in the bad. So it's one of these things, if you never look away from the bad, even while you're transcending toward the good. That there really is that. And like 40, I mean, makes that explicitly clear. I mean, to me, they ended their shows for years with 40. And but just you talk about, this is a real stadium anthem. Quote, I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined and heard my song. He lifts me up out of the pit, out of the miry clay. I will sing a new song. Because that's for lighters. I mean, that's so Bon Jovi right there. It's pretty remarkable.
But Bono is not singing about pussy. That's the difference.
No, he is not. He is not singing about pussy. And then the second verse, when he says that you set my feet upon a rock, made my footsteps firm, that's as Christian rescue as it gets. And so so he ends this album called War about the trying to find hope with war with the ultimate note of grace. And I think that's just even now. That's just an extraordinary. That's a really bold and brave statement on which to end a record. End a record with.
All right, now next is The Transition.
Yes.
Admittedly, U2 could have gone the safe route and continued in War's bombastic rock direction, becoming kind of a post-punk Led Zeppelin. But give credit where credit is due. The members of the band did not feel comfortable in this sedentary role and felt the itch to change, and more importantly, to expand their sound with sonic experimentalism. Enter producers Brian Eno and Daniel Lanois. Lanois at the time was a young Canadian hotshot understudy to Eno. Well, he's still Canadian, I guess. And Lanois was a bit of a legend. Even Eno, was a bit of a legend even at this time. He started out in the early 1970s as Roxy Music's on-stage charismatic sound effects guy, and transitioned from there into a solo career of a highly original and ambitious art rock and ambient electronica, all before producing seminal albums by David Bowie and Talking Heads that broke all kinds of ground with sonic innovation. Working with Eno and Lanois, U2 turned their sound inside out and upside down by creating eerie ambient soundscapes and providing the Edge's guitar sound with richer, warmer, more original textures by utilizing almost countless ways. An electronic bow to make the guitar sound like a violin, a slide guitar with echo, alternative tunings, a zero sustain, quote unquote, technique where the Edge muted his strings across the bridge, processing his guitar through a harmonizer effects device that raises or lowers pitches, processing the guitar through various delay effects pedals, and even an echo chamber, all of which served to make the Edge into a new kind of guitar hero for the 1980s and beyond.
Yeah.
The resulting sound on what became the Unforgettable Fire, released in the fall of 1984, could have alienated a lot of fans of U2 if it didn't have an ace in their pocket. And that was the anthemic arena rock single to beat all arena rock singles.
Oh, yeah.
The clarion call of Pride in the Name of Love. Bono's heartfelt ode to Martin Luther King not only lit up audiences in concert, it lit up radio stations around the world, becoming the band's biggest hit to date. Number 33 in the US Billboard Top 40 pop chart, number 3 in the UK, and the top 10 throughout Europe and Australia. Pride, combined with the epic, powerful, album-oriented rock radio hit and anti-heroin ballad Bad, which would itself become one of U2's most beloved and iconic songs, vaulted the Unforgettable Fire to number 1 in the UK and Australia, and the top 10 in the US and throughout Europe, catapulting the band into sports arenas around the world and setting them up for the imperial phase to come. Chris?
Yeah, absolutely underrated record. I think you hit the nail on the head. That U2, when you have Edge and you have that rhythm section, they're, I guess, genetically predisposed towards minimalism.
Yeah.
But so there is still some of that going on. But now with Eno and Lanois, they're filling in the spaces, and that they're bringing in the grandeur. And so you have the keys, you have those tunings, you have those new tones, and that experimental spirit. And so, yes, you have that anthemic rocker, which, by the way, is now at 234,524,400 plays on Spotify in Pride in the Name of Love. That song will always be awesome. One of my favorite bridges of any song of all time.
Yeah.
With, that lovely humming from Bono, accompanied by that kick-ass riff or that kick-ass, I don't even know if you call it a solo. It's just like a lead line on Loan from God by Edge. And so I guess it's still that maturation. They moved away from the Joy Division stuff with War, but it still had kind of almost like a Germanic discotechness to it. Here, now you're getting, they're starting to find these soundscapes of like a distant unnamed land somewhere between heaven and purgatory. And you kind of get that. And the thing, I like the ambition of the record, like stuff like Wire and Indian Summer Sky, the latter of which is a great song. But even the stuff that's not really songs works. Like MLK is just this beautiful little elegy. It's a snippet, but it's beautiful. And it's a great note on which to end the record. And so, you have the you have the triumphant tribute to MLK, and then you have the elegy. And so it really works well together. So yeah, Eno and Lanois as a team, the way that they produced these U2 records was always remarkable, because those two, I guess, as a production crew, were kind of like fifth and sixth members of the band. Even though, just by being the kind of the gurus, they were the shamans, and literally, as we'll get into in a little bit, literally the conductors that drag U2 from really goodness to true greatness.
Right.
So
And
they
that
need,
comes with the next one, the next
yeah.
album.
Hmm.
And I call this segment The Conquering. In July 1985, U2 were one of many huge names in popular music, performing at Live Aid, a multi-stadium venue benefit event for famine relief in Ethiopia. The band's iconic performance, highlighted by Bono's by now famous shtick of jumping into the crowd and dancing with select female members of the audience, helped make the band into a household name and sent their entire 4-album catalog at the time back into the charts in many countries throughout the world. This period also marked a change in the band's reputation, and specifically Bono's, as being in the vanguard and possibly the absolute forefront of socially conscious, politically minded rock bands. This created the context for the single-year journey Bono would undertake that would provide the basis for the lyrics and lyrical and musical themes for U2's next album. Consider what would happen from the fall of 1985 to the fall of 1986. Let's break it down. First, Bono and his wife traveled to Ethiopia, at the time one of the world's most impoverished, famine-stricken countries, as part of a volunteer group working in an orphanage that also serves as a feeding station. Just imagine the atrocities and the trauma-inducing tragedies one can witness just by being there.
Oh, yeah.
That is a moral, ethical education right there.
No doubt.
Next, Bono joined several artists on an album called Artists Against Apartheid, organized by Stephen Van Zandt, Bruce Springsteen's sidekick in his E Street Band, to benefit political organizations opposed to South Africa's oppressive and malevolent right-wing apartheid regime, directly supported by Ronald Reagan's government in the US. That is a political education right there. Next, Bono visits the Rolling Stones while they're in the studio recording their new album, ostensibly there to serve as a guest in order to cool the tensions at the time between Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. Bono's professed ignorance of the blues and American roots music drives Richards to educate the U2 frontman by feeding him a steady diet of Muddy Waters, John Lee Hooker, Robert Johnson, and more. That is a musical education right there. Next, U2 agreed to join Peter Gabriel, Lou Reed, The Police in their last performances together for the next 21 years, and several others in the Conspiracy of Hope Tour, a benefit tour to support Amnesty International, a still ongoing organization that provides funding for legal efforts to help political activists who have been wrongfully imprisoned. That's another global politics education right there. Finally, Bono and his wife accept the invitation of Sanctuary, an organization dedicated to helping peasant farmers caught in the crossfire of the civil war going on in El Salvador at the time, to fly in and help farmers and villagers who are being bombed and killed, mostly by right-wing government forces using artillery and weaponry supplied by, you guessed it, the United States. Bono is nearly killed by the hail of bullets and gunfire.
Wow.
That is a visceral global politics education.
No
right
shit.
There.
No shit.
It's no wonder that a fascination with America emerged, which essentially came down to the duality of what America represented. The quote-unquote dream of what America is supposed to be and sometimes is, wide open spaces, multiculturalism, artistic richness, versus the reality of the dark side of America, namely its cruel foreign policy and continuing issues with racism and intolerance. Combined with the band's general deepening interest in American roots music, blues, folk, and gospel in particular, U2's more mature and nuanced outlook on the world around them resulted in Bono's leap forward as a poetic lyricist and the band's leap forward in their musical development. With the music that would become the Joshua Tree, U2 augmented the experimental textures and sonic soundscapes of the Unforgettable Fire to the grounding power and the yearning soulfulness and authenticity of American roots music. The result was a masterpiece that conveyed an experience that was as widescreen and as cinematic as music listening could be, with expertly crafted songs of unpretentious gravity and poetic resonance that even to this day transcend, I think, the parameters of sheer rock and pop music. Once again, helmed in the studio by Brian Eno and Daniel Lanois, the album was released in March 1987 and was a global sensation, hitting #1 in all the expected countries and many more worldwide, eventually selling well over 20 million copies. The timeless ballad With or Without You and the driving gospel of I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For were worldwide chart-topping hits, while the epic Majestic Where the Streets Have No Name was another worldwide hit single that raised the bar as to how to open an album. While U2 hit another level of commercial success with the Joshua Tree, catapulting them into being legitimate stadium rock status, it's the critical plaudits and praise that solidified the band's status as one of the defining bands of the 1980s and possibly the defining band of their generation. Chris?
Yeah, for sure. As far as the defining band of their generation, I think that this is sort of what where they became that band, and this is where they stepped up into being the best band in the world for a 5-year streak. Right. Here's the thing. So we've talked about two predominant sort of strands, thematic strands that tie the U2 catalog together already. There's Hope and there's Grace. And there's a third one that I think really is really ripe and rich on the Joshua Tree, which is Discovery. Mm-hmm. And Discovery has sort of two branches to it, wonder and terror. There's the excitement of discovery, and sometimes what you find is whimsical and exciting, and sometimes it's horrific and sad and causes grief. And so here, the former category, you get In God's Country, which is, really talking about the spirituality of America and the combination of American Christianity and the landscapes, and sort of the look and feel of that in America. And then you get Bullet the Blue Sky, which is about the horrors of American imperialism, especially on the border. And so there's that. You mentioned Where the Streets Have No Name. That's one of my favorite songs of all time. I think it's the greatest album opener ever.
I don't know. Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit may have something to say about that.
Yeah, that's a close second. That's up there. But for me, for my money, this is the best. It's an amazing song, and it's got an intro that's so complex and so intricate that literally when they were recording basic tracks, Daniel Lanois had to go out there with a pointer and literally conduct the band through it because they were struggling with capturing the arrangement. And so he literally conducted the band through the intro. And so, which I've always found kind of remarkable that they would even have the ambition and the balls to even attempt to write something or arrange something, that soaring. And it's a song about heaven. And it's there's very few songs. There's a handful of songs. There's probably about 5 or 6 songs that sometimes almost move me to tears just thinking about them.
Yeah.
And Where the Streets Have No Name is one of those songs. And the idea is I want to take you to a place high on a desert plain.
Yeah.
And this idea of let's transcend, the crap that's going on the ground, and our love turning to rust, and all of the hecticness of the world, and let's go on that higher plane. And when I go there with you. It's all I can do. And I think anybody ever lost anybody they love, I encourage them to sit down with headphones, listen to this song with the lyrics in front of them, and consider that there's a journey going on, and a journey to whether it's heaven or transcendence or to a place where it's all peace and no pain. That's what that song embodies. Chris here again. We usually end our episodes by inviting you to join our Curmudgeonly community page on Facebook. Well, we're picking up our efforts there. Know people just as passionate as us about rock and roll? Invite them to join in the fun. You don't actually need our permission to do so. Also, expect to see a lot more content up there moving forward. Our mission is to engage you, so darn it, we'll engage you like a fire hose, or maybe like a firehouse if we're going to give love to Gene Simmons. We may also be making a few offers. Want to wear a t-shirt featuring our logo? You may have that opportunity soon. So be a fellow curmudgeon, help us expand our little community, and share your own musings via your own posts. We're at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock.
So where do U2 go from here? They're the biggest band in the world. They're the shit. No, I to this day, I still think the Joshua Tree is the best album of the 80s, ahead of Michael Jackson and even Prince, but that's just my opinion. But anyway, next, the misunderstood misstep. Oh boy. Okay. The original idea for the movie that became Rattle and Hum was for it to be a low-budget, low-key, minimalist, black and white affair that followed U2 around on their tour for the Joshua Tree, capturing them in low-key moments, being themselves, occasionally reflecting on their newfound fame and status, with up-close live footage modestly, and the key word here is modestly, interspersed throughout, with maybe 4 or 5 new U2 songs subtly introduced in the background during the everyday life scenes. Basically, it was supposed to be a 1980s update of the cinema verite style documentary that D.A. Pennebaker made about Bob Dylan back in 1965 called Don't Look Back. More importantly, it was to be released independently by the band themselves and shown in select art house independent theaters in the US, UK, and Europe.
Well, how'd that work out?
Yeah. Well, there's one person to blame for this, and it's none of the members of U2. The band's manager, Paul McGuinness, with his background working, remember, before he was a U2's manager, he was an assistant for production managers in the British film industry. And he thought it was a good idea to think big, act big, be big. That is, make this documentary into a half documentary, half concert film that was as big as the Joshua Tree album and tour themselves. All of a sudden, the live footage became widescreen cinematic affairs that required twice as much camera equipment, twice as much manual labor, and naturally, a much higher production cost. Worst of all, the low-key scenes of the band members going about their regular touring life needed to be blown up in order to take up running time and give the impression of importance. The result, under the direction of young filmmaker Phil Joannou, was U2 being portrayed as a little too enamored with their own status and importance. In short, pompous and arrogant, much to the band's chagrin later on. Watch as U2 go to Memphis and record a song in Sun Studios, the hallowed ground that gave us Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash. Aren't U2 worthy successors? Watch as U2 visit a Harlem church in New York and have the church choir sing "I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For." Isn't it cool to see a straight line from the blues and gospel to the heart and soul of U2? Yeah. Watch as U2 write a song for B.B. King and perform it live on stage in Fort Worth, Texas. Watch as B.B. King praises Bono's lyrics. Isn't Bono such a great songwriter? I'm sure that isn't what Joannou or the band intended, but it certainly came across that way. It turns out the black and white aesthetic was the only thing left over from the film's original creative vision. The movie is not all garbage, though. The live performance scenes are often pretty breathtaking, and a scene where they play Sunday Bloody Sunday is incredibly raw and powerful and sincere, with the actual performance taking place shortly after another bombing in Northern Ireland that week. Because of the $5 million the band's operation incurred for making the film, releasing it as a small independent movie in select theaters was no longer a viable option. Enter Paramount Pictures, who wanted to get in on the U2 bandwagon and reimburse their $5 million in order to distribute the film to over 1,000 theaters in the US and through all their affiliates in the UK and Europe. The film didn't do very well in the box office and was critically panned for the reasons I gave above, earning just $8 million compared to the $5 million Paramount paid. However, the double album soundtrack, half live tracks, half brand new studio recordings, did very well, going 5 times platinum in the US and multi-platinum in many countries throughout the world. The album got lukewarm reviews, mostly due to the live tracks, with Bono's grandstanding being a sticking point. Case in point, during a live version of the B-side Silver and Gold, Bono takes up the space in the song's middle section to give a speech about the horrors of South African apartheid before giving the instruction, "Okay, Edge, play the blues." Of course, the Edge goes on to play the most decidedly unbluesy solo imaginable. This is clearly the kind of stuff that goes down much better in the context of the emotion and energy of a live setting rather than a live album. What gets lost, however, in all the hoopla surrounding Rattle and Hum is that the new songs they recorded in the studio for the project are absolutely incredible and stand as among the most emotional and powerful songs U2 would ever produce. There is an amazing single album of original material buried within that would have been a worthy successor to the Joshua Tree. The album's lead-off single, Desire, is classic in its rollicking Bo Diddley beat and is arguably the rawest, purest slice of rock and roll the band ever made. It went to number 3 in the US Billboard chart and number 1 in the UK and several countries throughout the world. Angel of Harlem is a lovely, languid R&B soul track that takes Bono's lyrical and moving ode to Billie Holiday and beefs it up with Memphis-style horns. That hit number 14 in the US Billboard chart and went top 10 in the UK and around the world. Hawk Moon 269 takes the Bo Diddley beat and intensifies it with gospel fervor. God Part 2 is riveting, funky dance rock with one of the Edge's best riffs and is a precursor to the sound they would explore in a few years. And of course, there's the hit that should have been All I Want Is You, Bono's ballad of devotion to his wife, who by now must have put up with quite a lot of shit from this guy.
No shit.
a slow-burning, momentum-building beauty of emotional catharsis. It ends with an exquisite string arrangement by Van Dyke Parks, i.e. the guy who co-wrote Smile with Brian Wilson, and subtle keyboards by Benmont Tench from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers.
Never knew that.
The song went to number 4 in the UK and the top 10 throughout Europe, but it hit only 83 in the US and only 67 in Canada. What the fuck?
Yeah, seriously.
Anyway, Chris, what say you of Rattle and Hum before I give my alternate versions track listing?
Yeah, Rattle and Hum is a little bit conflicting for me. I generally agree with you that the studio stuff gets lost in a lot of the humdrum about the sort of this messianic presentation of Bono and the sort of the overdose of Americana that's portrayed in the movie and what was becoming apparent. There's a great quote that I found that Bono, and I'm not exactly sure where this shows up, but he says, "I put Catholic guilt to work pretty good for a rich rock star." And I think that that's kind of what was going on at this period. He almost was being presented as this sort of, like you said the right word at the beginning of this discussion, shamanistic. He almost was becoming this not necessarily messianic figure, but definitely rabbinic. And it was getting kind of annoying, and even one way or another, the band was starting to build monuments to itself.
Right.
I don't know. I disagree with you slightly about calling the studio stuff incredible. Desire, yes. Angel of Harlem, yes. All I Want Is You, yes. God Part 2, yes. But then they do the Bo Diddley beat again on Hawk Moon 269 to nowhere near as good effect. I've never been a fan of When Love Comes to Town, because if you're going to write a song for B.B. King, why are you going to do something that corny?
I like that song. I think it's snappy. I think it's a really good. It's the best song BB King had done in years at that point.
Well, yeah, absolutely. It was a great BB King solo. I mean, he kicks ass on the solo, so I'll give him that. But it's always kind of annoyed me. Love Rescue Me annoys me because that, the story about that is Bono wakes up from a dream with the song in his head. But in the dream, Bob Dylan was singing it. So he calls up Dylan and says, "Hey, you want to co-write a song with me?" And so that's their co-written song with Bob Dylan. And of course, this is in 1987, which is around the time of like Knocked Out Loaded.
Dylan was in the middle of a serious shit slump at this time.
Yeah. And so they're just laying on the love for the real America a little too thick for me. But the great stuff is truly, truly, truly great. I mean, All I Want Is You is one of my favorite songs by them. Probably one of my 10 favorite songs by U2. And just like you said, I know the string, the outro is just gorgeous. And, so as an album closers go, there's only one album closer that's better than that one in their catalog. And we'll get to that shortly. Sure. But yeah, what a really, it's an underrated record, but it's by no means is the studio stuff roundly rousing and perfect.
I think it's nearly perfect. Heartland is the only song I don't like. That just sounds like a bad outtake from the Unforgettable Fire. my alternate track listing of Rattle and Hum: slow fade in to Van Diemen's Land, and then it fades out. No recording of Phil Giuano interviewing U2. Straight to Desire, straight to Hawk Moon 269, straight to Angel of Harlem, then Love Rescue Me, then When Love Comes to Town, then I guess Heartland, because it is, there, and then end it with God Part 2 and All I Want Is You. Actually, I think Rattle and Hum, the movie, would have been better if it were just all live stuff.
If they had just kept the studio stuff to the studio album. And it's basically a case of, and I've used this line several times in the history of the Curmudgeon Rock Report. It's their 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bag album. It would have been better as two separate records. Have the live record and then have the studio record.
Not a live record. Make the movie just all live. The movie all live performance, and then the album all studio tracks. That's it.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I think that might have worked, but I mean, I think what you just had there would have worked. I think that keeping a snippet of Van Diemen's Land, which is kind of, I mean, that's the Edge trying to croon, and not Edge stick to the guitar, dude.
Well, every now and then Edge can sing okay, as long as he's doing backup vocals. Yeah. Anyway, so next, the reinvention. As the 1990s began, U2 were still the biggest band in the world, with Guns N' Roses and Bon Jovi probably hot on their heels for that honor. But their critical standing had taken a big hit with the flawed execution of both the Rattle and Hum movie and album. What they needed was a drastic makeover in both sound and image, and boy, did they deliver on that. In fact, it was one of the most dramatic and successful makeovers in sound and image in pop music history.
Oh, yeah.
The band reunited with Brian Eno and Daniel Lanois. Jimmy Iovine produced Rattle and Hum, and they retreated to Berlin to record in Hansa Studio, the very same studio where David Bowie recorded his groundbreaking, influential, legendary Berlin trilogy of late 1970s albums, Low, Heroes, and Lodger. The city of Berlin itself was going through a transitionary period as the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, with the formerly East and West Germany uniting as one country for the first time since before the end of World War II. It turned out to be the perfect setting for U2's radical overhauling. A little over a year ago, this podcast produced a series called The Fourth Golden Age of Rock, which covered the insane amount of classic music produced in the 1990s. This album was discussed in detail in the 1991 installment titled The Fourth Golden Age of Rock, 1991, Smells Like Revolution. Please seek it out wherever you listen to podcasts. To recap, in the break after the Rattle and Hum tour in 1990, early 90, the members of U2 and most significantly The Edge changed their listening habits. Out went American roots music. In came acid house infused dance rock of the kind coming out of the UK, industrial electronica, funk, and electronic dance music. This thoroughly modern sensibility would inform the band's direction and instincts throughout the recordings in Berlin. And despite some creative rough goings early on, the resulting album, Achtung Baby, was a postmodern masterpiece of visionary art rock that, aside from being a colossal commercial success, it went #1 all over the world and sold over 18 million copies worldwide, saved U2's career and reputation for the next decade, putting them in the vanguard of innovative pop music. The singles were pretty awesome, too. Mysterious Ways, with its sleek wah-wah pedal guitar, is sublime dance floor funk rock that went #9 in the US Billboard, #1 in Canada, and either top 10 or 20 throughout the UK and Europe. Even better than the real thing is updated glam rock, transported from some 1970s planet, but given a psychedelic makeover 1990s style, hitting the top 20 in pop charts worldwide. Of course, there is the transcendent ballad One, Bono's moving, desperate plea for togetherness that is altogether doomed and will be doomed. It is basically a breakup song.
Yeah.
And it's about a dying relationship. Was one of U2's greatest compositions and an enduring, timeless pop standard on par with anything the Beatles ever did. It was a worldwide top 10 hit. Personally, I've always been partial to the song Until the End of the World.
Yeah, me too.
A song that pulls off the near impossible trick of rocking balls and being haunting as hell as well. Lyrically, it depicts a fictional conversation between Jesus Christ and Judas Iscariot. But make no mistake, this is not a Christian song in the traditional sense. There's anger, regret, resentment, and even homoeroticism in Bono's little character vignette. Throw in everything I've said with the fact that The Edge completely overhauled his guitar sound to create sounds and textures never before heard on any rock album, and you have an album in Achtung Baby that sounded like nothing that ever came before it, like nothing since, and one of the most singularly greatest albums of all time. Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. If somebody out there ever asked me to submit a ballot for the 10 greatest albums ever made, Achtung Baby would be on it. What an extraordinary accomplishment of a record. And it's kind of funny that their most serious and most mature set of songs gets a title that is named after a throwaway joke from Mel Brooks, the producers.
Yeah.
Which always kind of cracks me up.
Well, that was the irony. Like U2 always said, like, we found our humor in Achtung Baby. And yeah, it's true. But it's such a lyrically heavy record, though.
Yeah, absolutely. And humor. and the quote that kind of sets it up from a Rolling Stone profile, Bono says, quote, "Rock and roll is ridiculous. It's absurd. In the past, U2 was trying to duck that. Now we're wrapping around our arms around it and giving it a great big kiss." And so, this idea of, using this ironic detachment to present, like you said, some really heady themes of loss and, romantic longing and desperation and things falling apart, because you got to remember, this is Europe at that time had a lot of tension politically as well. But this album, it's a melding of love songs and breakup songs and just real invocations of spirituality, invocations of grief. Love is Blindness is another one of my favorites, and that's the album closer that I was referring to. Just really extraordinary. I mean, that essentially is blues. that that really counts as blues rock. And it just
that song by I'm reading the book U2 by U2, which published in 2006. It's basically the band giving an oral history of themselves, all four members plus the manager, Paul McGuinness. Bono said that song Love is Blindness, Love is Blindness, he wrote it on the piano and he submitted it. He wanted to give it to Nina Simone.
Oh, wow.
For her to, before he kept it for U2. He wanted to give that song to Nina Simone.
So. Yeah, which would make a lot of sense. Just sonically and some of the stuff that Edge is doing. True fact, he was influenced by Neil Young's work on Weld and Arc, and that kind of soaring guitar minimalism, and that kind of gnarly. Like you said, almost psychedelic sound. Some of that comes from Neil Young. So go figures.
On this episode, we made an attempt to remind people of a time when U2 didn't suck. For the next episode, we are officially going back to our In Defense Of series to examine one of the most critically dismissed bands ever, and one of the most unpopular among younger generations of rock fans. Boston. Yeah, did you get a creepy shiver as you heard that? So do a lot of too cool hipsters and certain music fans of a younger stock when they hear that name. Pompous, bloated 1970s arena rock of the most indulgent and ludicrous proportions, with a ridiculous band logo and a lead singer with an even more ridiculous afro haircut and high-pitched voice. But we are not here to badmouth the late Brad Delp. On the contrary, we aim to heap praise on a debut album whose 8 songs, every single one of them, is a staple of any classic rock radio station, terrestrial or satellite, that still grooves to the 1970s. Sometimes, when an album of macho cock rock elevated to epic grandiosity sells 17 million copies in the US alone, the general consensus may just be right. Join us next time as the Curmudgeon Rock Report brings you In Defense Of Boston's Boston. Yes, really. Next, The Exploration. From 1992 through 93, U2 embarked on their groundbreaking, visionary Zoo TV tour. It's one of the most important and influential visual spectacles ever produced within the parameters of the concert-going experience. Please check out our episode. It's actually episode number 33 of the Curmudgeon Rock Report, the fourth golden age of rock in 1992. Take the power back. Listen to that for Chris's excellent breakdown of that tour. Now, we're going to talk about what came after Achtung Baby. During the North American stadium leg of the 92 tour, U2 took intermittent breaks in the tour to go into the studio, but they really focused on it in early 1993 when they were getting ready for the European leg of the stadium tour. And they went in to record an EP to be released in 93 before the European and Australian stadium legs of that marathon Zoo TV tour. It turns out the band was on a creative peak following both the masterpiece that was Achtung Baby and the energy they had accumulated from touring. The EP ended up being their 8th studio album called Zooropa, released in the spring of 1993, and it picked up where Achtung Baby left off, upping the ante for sonic experimentalism and experimentation and pushing boundaries. 30 years after its release, one marvels at how ballsy and courageous it was for U2 to release such an album at the peak of their popularity, as Zooropa charted #1 all over the world. Never before and never since has the band sounded so reckless and eager to stretch out into the great beyond and dive into the deepest waters. The lead single, Numb, is pure art rock excess in the best way, with the Edge's spoken word vocals guiding a 2-note industrial guitar riff and Larry Mullen's drumming doing its best impression of a drum machine. Bono's falsetto vocals hover over the whole thing like a malevolent ghost. Lemon is pure Euro trash disco, which works because number one, it's catchy as fuck. And number two, it fits perfectly within the context of the album, whose themes were inspired by the theme of the Zoo TV tour itself, it being mass media saturation and its dehumanizing effects. Lemon is pure, unadulterated, cheesy, over-the-top, conscious-free pleasure. It isn't good for you, but you can't resist it, can you? That kind of thing. The dirty funk of Daddy's Gonna Pay for Your Crashed Car is one of pop music's greatest and most underrated treatises on class and privilege, and Babyface is delectable R&B disguised as decadent Europop, and a fascinating character sketch of sexual detachment. The real thing hurts too much emotionally, so pornography is the only way the character can get himself off. I rank it number 4 in the pantheon of U2 albums, and it's a near masterpiece that would have been perfect if not for the dreary Johnny Cash collaboration in the end. But Chris, you've always been a bigger fan of that song.
Yeah, bullshit. The Wanderer is the best song on the record.
Oh, bullshit. Get out of here. It's the one that doesn't belong.
No, it actually is the one that brings the album home towards being a near masterpiece. We'll always disagree on that point. This album is brilliant. It's basically it's an album about uncertainty and about anxiety over a changing world, about a changing society, about changing technology, and about trying to find meaning in a world where meaning is becoming diffuse and more hard to find. And I think that's what really kind of separates it out. I think that the two songs, if there's two polls for the record for me, there's The First Time, which is a song basically about the prodigal son deciding not to come home. I mean, talk about uncertainty. He decides to stay defiant. And then The Wanderer, which is about as ecclesiastical as it gets in terms of it's the atomic cowboy song. It's the cowboy wandering the streets trying to find meaning in a world that's been basically incinerated. and the way that Johnny Cash sings it and the lyric, I went out walking with a Bible and a gun, and just sort of playing that character, and having Johnny Cash sing that song is absolutely inspired. It really is. But just the fact that you said it is a really, really brave record because they took on that changing Europe. And because remember, that was at the height of the Sarajevo conflict, the Bosnian genocide. And so there was just a lot going on in the world, and for them to capture that. And remember, I talk about Zooropa. We did a bonus episode called The Muses of Muse late last year, and I kind of did a review of Zooropa. One of the amazing things about that record is the way they recorded it is because they were late in getting it done. The idea was the goal was to get it done before they went and did the European leg of Zoo TV, but they didn't quite make it. And so what they would do is they would go do a show in like Rome, and then they would take a flight back to Dublin and do recording and do mixing and overdubs or whatever, then go back out on a plane and maybe hit like, I don't know, Belgrade, or I'm just making shit up, and then do that show and then fly back to Dublin. And they did that for like 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And they must have been tired as hell after that. And so the fact that they're basically doing this in a whirlwind of creativity, but also a whirlwind of exhaustion is pretty impressive. I gotta say. So it's it is the single most underrated Zooropa record. It belongs. U2
record.
What did I say?
The single most underrated Zooropa record.
There's no doubt that it's the most underrated Zooropa record, but it's the most underrated U2 record. I would definitely I put it either third or fourth.
I have it fourth. My hierarchy is Joshua Tree, Achtung Baby, War, Zooropa. That's how.
Yeah, mine would be Achtung Baby, Joshua Tree, and then depending on the day, War and Zooropa and War.
Hey, so we have the same four.
Yeah, we have the same four. It's just
Yeah.
the order is slightly different. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm definitely enthusiastic about Zooropa. It's a fascinating record. It's one that I listen to every couple of years just to remind myself of how fascinating it is.
All right, now next, the incomplete near masterwork. For most of 1996, U2 worked on the album that would become Pop. They had the tour all set up, whereas the visual spectacle of Zoo TV was a commentary on the numbing effects of mass media saturation. The Pop Mart tour was to be a very, very ironic commentary on the numbing effects of the combination of commercialism and consumerism. It was to be a massive stage production. Unfortunately, the tour was more worked out than the accompanying album. U2 are a band that are notoriously they notoriously labor for lengthy periods of time over their albums, and the process was proving especially true for Pop, which eventually came out in the spring of 1997. They were forced to complete the record before they were really ready to finish it because of the fixed schedule of the tour. While the album suffered a bit from the time crunch, especially in the flow and the sequencing of the record and how it mellows out toward the end. However, Pop is by no means a dud, and nor is it a turd in the U2 canon like a lot of people think. In fact, it's quite underrated, and the passage of time has been quite kind to most of it. The album was intended to be a full-blown excursion into electronica and the kind of dance-oriented techno that was big at the time. But even though the techno rock ended up being limited to just the first half of the album, what survived from the fraught sessions was quite excellent, actually. Despite the cheesy video for Discotheque, which sees the members of U2 dressed up and dancing like the village people, the song itself is a magnificent slice of dance rock, with the edges utilizing a wide palette of distorted and processed guitars to mesmerizing effect. Do You Feel Loved rides one of the greatest bass lines Adam Clayton ever came up with to disco rock heaven. Mofo blasts out of the speakers like the full-on fusion of techno and rock that it is. The influence of the Chemical Brothers is clear from the outset. Even if the album slows down as it progresses, the songs are still strong enough that they hold the album up. Miami is the kind of trashy, damaged art pop that would have fit perfectly on Zooropa and adds an intriguing color to Pop. If You Wear That Velvet Dress continues on the ambient soul groove they discovered on the Passengers album and gives it an exquisite, haunting beauty. The album ends on a dour note with the clunky Wake Up Dead Man, but it should have ended with the previous song, the yearning yet tension-filled Please, where Bono delivers some of his most sincerely emotional singing and moving lyrics. The album's overall theme of looking for God in a godless world may seem to some as a little too much Christian rock hubris, but historically with U2, Christian themes and even content are always delivered with more questioning and more doubt than blind devotion. That's what's always separated U2 from crapola like Creed. Anyway, the album went #1 in 35 different countries. By this point, anything U2 released would go straight to #1. Initial sales and even critical reviews were strong at first, but after only a few weeks, the album plummeted down the charts in a way previous U2 albums hadn't, as did the album's critical standing. The pressure to finish the album meant the band couldn't rehearse effectively for the upcoming tour. The first few weeks of shows suffered as a result. Regardless, the enormity and frankly campy nature of the Pop Mart tour setup was unappealing to a lot of fans in North America. In both North American legs, in shows all played in outdoor stadiums, the vast majority of shows were not sold out, many of which drawing just enough to fill an indoor arena. Throughout Europe, South America, and Australia and New Zealand, however, the tour did much better and sold out. Nevertheless, the failure in North America of both the album and the tour stung the band's pride and their wallets really hard. This instigated a much more conservative, pared down approach to their next album, as well as a more modest presentation for smaller venues on their next tour. But as far as Pop is concerned, no, it isn't perfect, but it could have been if the band had more time. I blame the producers, Flood and Howie B, for not cracking the whip harder, as Brian Eno and Daniel Lanois used to. Chris?
Yeah, I guess I agree with that. The album's not that well mixed, and that's where it kind of suffers. It's not that well sequenced, and it's not that well mixed, but it does have its strong. It's a great half a record. Yeah. And I've always been a fan of "If God Will Send His Angels" too. I think that's a great song. It just Pop, like you said, it kind of suffers that they were an ambitious band, and I think they got a little too ambitious for their own good. It's a breathtakingly risky album, and the tour is breathtakingly risky too, but they bit off more than they can chew. And like you said, they almost went broke, and because of that, they got humbled, and they got humbled badly. And that's what, kind of presages and really kind of sets up the next 20-something years of their records, where the risk-taking had to take a back seat to actually like succeeding commercially. Which is too bad because, man, could you imagine them building off of stuff like Mofo or like Last Night on Earth, or even Miami? Big fan of Miami, like building on stuff like that. Like, where would they have taken it? And granted, we wouldn't have got Beautiful Day or City of Blinding Lights or any of some of those great anthemic songs that they did over the next like 5 or 6 years after this, but I would have much rather seen the experimental U2 that wasn't afraid to fail.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to get into this very briefly, but I think Pop, I like a lot of the songs on it. I just think it wasn't completed. There are 2 or 3 clunkers on it, but it wasn't completed. Like you said, it wasn't mixed that great. It just needed more time. And like I said, I think this is an album that kind of needed Eno and Lanois because those guys really pushed and
they were disciplined.
They disciplined U2. Howie B and Flood weren't that, and the album suffered as a result because of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Notice at the beginning of if you look at the set lists, the Pop Mart tour is very heavy on songs from Pop. By the end of the tour, they were only playing 2 or 3 songs from Pop, and it became a greatest set.
I mean, they smartened up because the reception was so lukewarm. Yeah, and that really was a disaster. And hey, there's another plug for our Fourth Golden Age of Rock series. I covered the Pop tour in the 1997 episode. The Perfect Drug. 1997, The Perfect Drug. So basically, folks, just go out and check out all of our Fourth Golden Age of Rock series. It's one of the finest series you'll find on the 90s. Awesome, baby. Awesome.
Yeah, baby. Yeah. So very briefly, what happened? Where did U2 go in the 21st century? Well, they made a comeback record in 2000 with All That You Can't Leave Behind. It was very successful. I think it's a great half record. It's front loaded with really good, tight, concise, not so experimental, not so risky, just straightforward pop songs. The second half kind of falls apart for me. I hate the song New York. I think the last couple of tracks are just really shitty. It's just schmaltzy and corny. But the first half is really good. And then from How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb onward, I think U2 have been a complete shower of shit. They're not politically, but musically, they've been way too conservative, way too bland, way too safe. The 2009 album, No Lines on the Horizon, No Songs on the Horizon is what it should have been called. It's just really shitty. And in 2014, they pissed a lot of people off when they're
the iPod stuff.
With iTunes. What they did is that they put out an album called Songs of Innocence, and really bad. It's just U2 at their songwriting nadir. And what they did, they made a deal with Apple in which the album would automatically load into anyone who's using iTunes. And it really backfired on them in a PR sense. Nobody asked to have the new U2 album forced into their iTunes. They had to apologize for that. And They did apologize for it, and they kind of backtracked a little bit, and they said, I remember reading one interview in 2014, 2015, when Bono was saying like, well, I mean, think of it, it's just like it's like Santa Claus giving away free gifts. What's wrong with that? Well, no, the problem, Bono, is that children ask Santa Claus for gifts. No one asked you for your shitty new album.
Yeah, I was going to say, if the album was actually good, it might not have been a problem. Songs of Impotence.
Yeah, pretty much.
It should have been called. There is one great song I can't remember the name of it, but there's like one great song on it towards the end of the record. The rest of it is just horseshit.
Yeah.
Total horseshit. And I will say this, I'm a big fan of How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb as far as being a throwback record. It's kind of, let's go back to simple and the kind of
but they did that with All That You Can't Leave Behind.
Yeah,
that's what that album is.
And then they did it better
way.
Overall.
The only song on How to Dismantle Atomic Bomb that I like is the first song, the single where they ripped off Sonic Youth's riff.
Yeah, well,
that's the only one.
I love that song. I love City of Blinding Lights. I love Yahweh. Yahweh is one of the most moving songs in the entire U2 catalog. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that record. But yeah, after that, I mean, No Songs on the Horizon is pretty much a perfect name for that. They really did go downhill, and they've been, they've been phoning it in. Basically, they've been corporate whores, like I said at the beginning of this episode. And I think that, to go into our next thing, that is exactly why they've fallen out of favor with younger generations of rock pop fans. Because when people think of corporate whoring in rock, hey, the Rolling Stones have got knocked off that mantle.
It's U2 now. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. And of course, now they're like, they're approaching Social Security age, or I think they're at Social Security age now. And so they're kind of, sad old, nostalgia rock.
That's what they do. That's what they're doing now. Yeah.
Yeah. They're effectively, they're kind of like the equivalent of like Las Vegas greeters now. They're greeting people to like brand new, like excessive, like over the top venues in Las Vegas. They're the tourism bureau for Las Vegas right now. Pretty sad.
So sad from what they used to be. But you can always go back and listen to their hot streak when they were the biggest and best band in the world. It was about a good, definitely 10 years. I would say maybe 15. Stretch it out because I have a lot of sentiment for what pop could have been. And I do like the first half of All That You Can't Leave Behind. And that's it. After that, I give up on U2 after that.
Yeah, I kind of do too. But just remember through that whole thing, the three words to come away with from this retrospective on U2: hope, grace, and discovery. That's what they really delved in. And they really did those three things thematically and musically better than any band ever. The only one that would approach them, at least on hope, is the Beatles.
Right.
Nobody touches them on grace, and nobody touches them on discovery. Although discovery, I guess REM is kind of in the ballpark. But hope, grace, discovery.
No grace with REM because those guys, the four atheists who, they don't have that. They don't have that religious backbone,
Yeah, absolutely. So there you go, folks. There is your. Remember when U2 didn't suck? Yeah, they used to not suck, and they used to be both of our favorite bands. And without them, life might have come out very, very differently. As in to say, we might not actually be here. And in my case, that might actually be true. I don't know about you, but I might not be here if it wasn't for you too.
I mean, I definitely wouldn't. They're the ones that kept me in the late 1980s. They kept me so on the thread of interest in modern rock when everything else was so bad. And then I discovered grunge. Them and Nirvana helped keep me sane. I'll definitely say that. And speaking of staying sane, as we do at the end of these episodes, we encourage everybody to join our wonderful and glorious curmudgeonly community on Facebook, where Arturo just posted his 1988 list of the greatest studio albums, according to Arturo, which is always an interesting romp. For what it's worth, best album of the 80s, Appetite for Destruction. No way. No way.
Yeah, we'll always disagree on that point. Appetite for Destruction, baby. Anyway, join us there at facebook.com/groups YouTube.com/Curmudgeon Rock, and mirth and merriment will be had by all. And invite your friends too. It's a rockin' party. If you have anything to say about U2, or if you think we're full of crap, or if you love us, write us fan mail at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. And finally, you can catch us still on X or Twitter or whatever the hell Elon Musk wants to call it. It's still, and it's certainly an interesting place. It sucks more than it used to, but it's certainly interesting. And then, yeah, maybe we'll get around to doing a Spotify playlist on this album too, and we'll give you all the U2 that you can handle from their golden age.